for this long and then to have an audience and people on iTunes downloading as we speak?
It's pretty crazy, honestly. I mean, there were definitely times in this project where I wondered if it would ever see the light of day at all. So the fact that it's doing well on iTunes and that people are excited about it, it's a huge honor, and I'm super humbled and just stoked that it's getting out there.
Rafa, what was it like for you to see it?
For me, it's been pretty interesting because
Let's be loud. We'll do it like that.
because I don't know, the day that I decided that I was, after 3 years, and I was like, all right, I'm not doing this anymore. Like for me, it was like, I'm ready to throw 3 years of work to the garbage. I was ready to just, ditch it all, forget about it, and, all done. But then watch Rush get into the footage for 2 years, and it took him about really like 2 full years of editing and working with all this stuff. All of a sudden, it was really hard because there was not a story anymore. So it's been really cool to see whatever came out of those 3 full years, watching 2 years of editing process and working with storytellers, working with editors, and finally being able to put something together. And it's cool to see something that was something that at some point was a piece of garbage to become a movie that somehow worked out.
Great. I'm going to start out kind of at the beginning of the film and walk through it. So one of the first things it says is, see if it works, there we go. So one of the first things it says is water is life and it shapes its own path. So I'm curious to know, how has the making of the film shaped you both personally and then professionally?
Yeah, I would say, for me, like when I started this film, like this is my 8th movie, but before this I always made just like the annual shred kayak flick, so it was always, and I still have a huge passion for, what we call kayak porn, which is basically just like a celebration of the sport, and oftentimes just, great music mixed with cool footage. So this was a real departure for me. This was my first time really kind of stepping up to trying to tell a real story. And so I think that, it definitely shaped me in the sense that I feel like when I started this project, I was making a certain type of genre of action sports film, and I just had kind of learned how to make a different genre, which is basically telling a real story. And the reception of this film has, been far above and beyond anything I've made before, because it's reached out beyond the core endemic sort of kayak community. And so that's kind of been an eye-opener, and definitely, I guess that's how it's kind of shaped me.
And I think as a kayaker, it's interesting for me to watch the movie, be like, oh, that was Rafa when he was 22 and he was stupid. And it's been really cool for me, to both to live the whole process and live the whole process of maturity like that, and also to look back at all the journey and live every step. But definitely like that, it's a maturity process, and it's cool to see a lot of that footage that nowadays seems like a long time ago.
Right.
And it's like, wow, that was actually like 4 years ago, and it's so much that consistently happens, and the sport is evolving like crazy every day. And, watching a lot of that and being like, wow, that was 4 years ago, and now we're doing all this other stuff.
Well, I have a question about the research. It goes into the film, you start researching the people who have attempted Niagara. And I believe in the film it says 5 out of 15 haven't made it. So when you were researching and seeing what they did, was that an encouraging, when you were going through how they did it, and the 10 or so that did do it successfully, was that research encouraging for you, or was that kind of a roadblock in your mind? Yeah.
Thank you. I don't think it was necessarily a roadblock, but it definitely makes it a little bit harder. When you're looking at the numbers, it's interesting because, one of the harder things about Niagara Falls is that it's illegal, so you can't really, go in there and test it out. You can't, whenever we threw kayaks over Niagara Falls, all of a sudden police was looking for us. It almost was a bad idea. But yeah, I went, a lot of the 3 years were about how could we figure out if it's deep enough, if, I'm gonna go behind the falls or come out, whereas in any other waterfall on the planet, you could just, go and try it out or whatever. I'm actually a mechanical engineer, and half of my brain works in a really systematical way. So half of my brain is like, all right, I need to know exactly where the rocks are to know, if I need that much volume to be able to go in and clear it properly. So that part of my brain was always, it was never at peace, because there's, one of the interesting things is that there's no technology right now that could tell you exactly what the bottom of a waterfall looks like. So, that's like, all right, if I can't know that, am I willing to put my life in the line for that? On the other hand, looking at information, I spent maybe up to 20 visits to Niagara Falls, going to the library, studying, looking at the falls so many times. And one of the interesting facts is that, every single barrel that has gone over the line that I was looking at has survived. So every single one of the barrels that has done that same line has come out unscattered. And there's actually been people that have tried to commit suicide, jumped in, at the falls right there, jumped over the wall, and have swam over the same line that I was going to attempt, and have survived. So what that means is that, in a barrel is much bigger, so it will float more, it won't go as deep, whereas someone swimming will go the deepest, deeper than a kayak. So if they have survived, it means that they haven't hit any rocks. So, are you willing to put your life in a kayak and trust the fact that someone that has swam over it has survived, even though when you look at it, there's rocks right there? So that's one of the trippy parts about the whole project.
You can keep it, I'll use this. So, I want to discuss, I'm good, I'll be loud. I'm going to discuss the first 2.5 minutes of the film, which for me personally is probably the most unique perspective of a traumatic event like that I've ever seen from that GoPro on Jared's body. So I'm curious, when did you decide to use it at the beginning of the film and then to kind of tease it and then meet us later? Personally, I wasn't sure. I was thinking, are we really watching this right now? I've never seen something, and I know we discussed earlier that in most cases, I think you said 1 out of 10 people in that state actually don't make it. So you don't typically see that footage. It's not footage that you put out. So when did you decide to do that? And then for you, I want to know, did you watch it together? When did you realize, okay, we're going to see this situation that was quite scarring for us?
Yeah, I definitely, once I reviewed the footage and I saw everything, I knew that we had something extremely powerful, but I wasn't really sure if it was something that I wanted that the world should see, honestly. And there was definitely a few people in the group who were watching it, and they said, we should probably never show this. Because it does it's pretty heavy stuff, and so I just, at that time, it was such a heavy situation, and we kind of left Mexico just very sad and kind of down, after that whole incident, but also happy in a way too. But actually, I showed it to my dad maybe a month or so after I went home for a visit, and I was like, I should show you this footage. And he kind of inspired me more than anyone, because he said, this is something that the entire paddling community has to see. And so it took me a little while on the creative front to figure out how to put that at the start of the film. There was a few different edits where I kind of had it in the middle, and it was kind of almost like a eureka moment when I figured out, I was like, this could be the intro to the film, and it could also kind of come back later on. And figuring out how to do that with the story was hands down the most complicated part of the film. I edited the intro to this movie, I think 47 times. It took me a lot of times before it all kind of worked, and then the whole reversal thing and everything, and it was really kind of complicated. But in the end, I think that it is important footage. It's educational footage. If you watch the raw footage of the entire incident, that's also even more interesting in a way. And the reality of it is, like you said, this is an extremely rare scenario for someone to drown in warm water, and for us to actually bring him back was it's a totally rare situation, and we're just beyond grateful that it worked out the way that it did.
And yeah, we did actually, after it happened, we watched the footage. I think we did watch it with Jared, right? I think we were. Oh, okay. So he didn't see it right then, but I remember us being in my house in Mexico City, all, you know, around a laptop watching this and all being like, oh my God, this is, you know, because it's one thing, the fact that it happened, and another thing, the fact that he had a GoPro on his head that was, you know, facing on the right angle and absolutely clear of drops of water the whole time. Yeah, so it was, you know, incredible. We actually, something interesting, about 2 or 3 months ago, we had a screening of Chasing Niagara in the town where we all live up in White Salmon, Washington. And we did a screening with the whole kayaking community, and we got to sit down with Jared and his girlfriend and his brother, Aniol, and it was cool to be there. You know, it was definitely pretty trippy. It was hard for Jared hadn't personally seen, he had seen his GoPro clip, but he hadn't seen the outside angles and how it played out in the story. And it was definitely pretty interesting to sit down with him and watch the whole thing.
I think the common theme throughout was really understanding controlled risk and when to take that risk, and knowing, obviously it's very calculated, it's science. You guys take the time to know your risk, but what are some of the non-negotiables when you're going to do something that hasn't been done before?
I mean, I think that anytime, and this is kind of a disheartening aspect of kayaking, but anytime I step out the door and I go to paddle, even my local, you know, class 5 run, which I run every single day, you're accepting the fact that you could die that day. And that is like a harsh reality of our sport. And, you know, I think it's a harsh reality of any action sport, really. And, you know, I think that you always kind of have it in your head that you're not going to, of course, and you're going to do everything that you can in your power to stay alive and be as safe as possible. But it is something that as athletes, I think that we kind of, in a way, have come to terms with. But at the same time, you know, nothing is worth dying for, and we do our absolute best every day out there to make sure that we come home safe and sound.
Yeah, I think in the end, it's, at least for me, it's like a balance, you know, between I'll look at a waterfall and I'll be like, this is the fun factor, like how much is it worth to like try this out, and then this is the risk factor, how much am I worth to put on the line for this. And in the end, you know, every day we go out paddling, it's a little bit of that. You know, you do want to break your own boundaries, you do want to push your own limits, and you almost kind of have to be up there. But in the end, you know, every single decision comes to that, back to that balance between, you know, is it worth it for the fun, or, you know, is it more dangerous than it actually is worth?
In the film, I may not pronounce this correctly, Zaheli?
Yeah, same.
Zaheli. That's a moment where the calculated risk, you felt super confident, or you thought you could do it, and you guys kind of were challenging him and wanting to have him look at it from different angles. When do you trust the person that you're with enough and say, okay, I'm not going to do it, but I know that he can? What is that deciding factor for you guys?
I think it is a bit of a tricky situation at times. Like, it's funny for me actually to look back at that footage and be like, oh wow, that was me, you know, like I should actually probably not have done that. And that moment, I remember being like so confident about my decision. And it's funny because looking back at it, I remember absolutely being on the other side, you know, and being on a river in Mexico with a kid that at that point was pushing the sport in the next level and being like, man, he's loose, you know, and it's hard because in the end, you know, as part of, you know, as being his friend, and as we work in the river, as being each other's safety, like main safety support, we want to help our friends make right decisions. But at the same time, when someone has a motivation, you know, and he has a vision, you also have to respect it and, you know, ride his flow and do whatever you can to support him to make it safely.
And then I want to bring up Angel Wings, because I know that in the beginning it showed that was a little bit of a challenge for you, and then you guys overcame that. It's definitely a high in the movie, a nice moment for you guys to all be there together. Is that something that you check off the list and then you move on to something, or is that something that you want to go back to and try a different way? How do you kind of assess when you accomplish something like that?
Yeah, well, it's interesting you say that because I mean, like for Sahaley, for example, that was a waterfall that Evan and I had both run before. And in the case of Angel Wings was a drop that Rafa had run before, but Evan and I had not run. So I think that sometimes when somebody hasn't paddled something before, you have a much bigger motivation to paddle it. You know, that was certainly the case in Sahaley. You know, it's something that I'd done before, and I actually gotten a terrible concussion from it, the worst concussion I ever had, just a couple months previous. So I wasn't like super fired up to run it right then, you know. And the same thing with Angel Wings. Rafa had this kind of terrifying experience there, you know, 6 or 7 years before. So he wasn't as fired up to paddle it. But I mean, so I think that does come into play without question. You know, like on that day, at that time, Evan and I were definitely the motivating factors. It was something we really wanted to do, and it was also part of the project and part of the dream and part of what we felt like would be appropriate for Rafa to kind of overcome this fear and overcome this situation that he had before. So, you know, there's always different, I think, motivations that kind of play into it, and it's just kind of different for every drop.
So I have a quick, Tyler, I'm putting you on the spot. I don't know where you are.
T-Rod, we're gonna get T-Rod up here. T-Diggity.
They told me that you were the person to ask this when I talked to them. As you are the current record holder at 189 feet. I want to kind of talk about logistics and what does it feel like when you're falling at 189 feet to your body once you land, even if you do it in the correct, perfect form.
Yeah, I think that Rafa had a pretty amazing quote in the movie when he said, "Man, that wasn't 3 seconds, that was a lifetime," and it really is. And the free fall lasts forever, and then the impact is really hard. It's you know, it's hard to predict exactly how it's going to be just because there's so much variable at the bottom of the waterfall. What surge you land with, what you know, there's just so many different things influencing you at the base of a waterfall. But for me personally, and I'm sure for Rafa as well, I mean, the loose was an absolutely huge hit. I mean, it completely dazed me, knocked the wind out of me, broke my paddle into about 4 pieces, and you know, it was a very, very hard impact. And so, but 189 feet, you're expected to have a very hard impact at the bottom of it. You know, whereas you know, you can have very hard impacts on much smaller waterfalls, 30, 40 feet, and you can run that waterfall one day, have a completely soft, you know, easy line, and run it the next day and just have a really, really intense impact. So, yeah, I think that the whole thing is just that waterfalls and rivers, there's just a lot of variables in play that you can't control.
So, speaking of the impact, I know throughout the film you had, was it a broken nose? Is that what was happening in that scene?
Quite a few broken noses.
Yeah, I saw that. So, when you guys hit, how do you avoid hitting your face? I mean, you're essentially.
I don't know, don't ask me, I'm not very good.
So Rush, the way you do it, we've actually tried to design like a little pillow for Rush's kayak, so he doesn't like hit the plastic straight with his nose. But yeah, there's many different. Well, there's basically 2 main techniques, like we explained in the movie. You either throw your paddle, in which case you would protect your face with your arms, like crossing them or something like that. Or the other technique, which is the one that I follow, is holding on to my paddle, and in that case, I protect my face with my right arm.
Right. Okay, let's talk about, before we get to the end of the film, there's a couple fun facts I just kind of wanted to bring up. One being the soundtrack, which I personally really enjoyed, and I found out kind of last minute that Rush actually is rapping in part of it, and I think you said 60% is original soundtrack.
Yeah, I worked with a composer down here in LA, and then wrote like all of the melodies and a lot of the songs in the movie with him, along with a couple other like folk bands. And music's a huge part for me. I do most of the editing as well, but I start with the music first always. Music is number 1 for me, for sure.
From a director's perspective, obviously the climax and end of the movie are both things that were really unforeseen. You didn't know they were going to happen. So when those things happen, how do you then as a storyteller completely decide to go with it, what was your thought process as this film was coming together?
Well, to be totally honest, like when we finished the film, or when we finished shooting and you know, Rafa decided not to do it, I didn't actually think that we had a movie. And that this film has been inspirational for me in a way, because as a filmmaker, I felt like at that time that I was like, I'm like done, you know, this is bad, you know, Red Bull's never gonna work with me again. Like this is, you know, it was really, I went through a little bit of, honestly, like a depression, like a hangover after the movie, just being like, what can I possibly do with this? You know, I have no climax, there is no ending to this film. It's not the hero ending that I sought out to create. But it just goes to show that if you know, I stuck with it, and I spent really, like literally 2 years editing. So it was just over and over again, like working at it. And there was a lot of times where I mean, seriously, in my head, I was like, this movie sucks. I mean, I did like a 96-minute rough cut, and I was like, this is the worst movie ever, you know? But it does, it's true. If you just stick with something and you just mess with it long enough, you can make it, you know, not totally suck.
It's awesome. It is awesome.
Thank you, I appreciate it.
Rafa, for you in that moment, the day before or the day of the descent, what was going through, I know you share what was kind of going through your head, but what was that ultimate decision? I know there was several things in your mind, but what was that decision for you and the gravity of that for your team and for what you guys were doing?
I mean, I don't know, at least like for making the decision, a lot of that weight in my mind was the fact of, like, one of them was like the depth. Like, I could never know if it was deep enough, so that way I was like, I could never know if I was gonna make it alive or not. And then, you know, added to that, the fact that my friends could go to jail for a lifetime. Like, I don't know if, you know, it is, you know, somewhere in the movie, but, you know, for me it was such a big thing, like finally being able to talk to a lawyer a couple weeks before and understanding that, you know, I need friends at the bottom, and if I do happen to, worst case scenario, die in Niagara Falls, those friends will most likely go to jail for a lifetime. Like, all of a sudden, you know, it turns my own personal ambition and my own personal dream into something that doesn't just affect my own destiny, but affects my loving friends. Like, people, I actually like stood in front of my friends 2 weeks before running Niagara Falls, and I looked to them in the eye and I explained them exactly what the lawyer had told me, and I was like, Mark and Blake, you guys are gonna be at the bottom. If I do happen to die in Niagara Falls, you guys will most likely go to jail for a lifetime. And I told them, and you know what they did? They were like, dude, we're in here for you. Like, we're committed to this, and we believe in your decision, and we believe in your motivation. And for me, it was something so big, you know. In the end, for me, the whole project became that, you know, more of an understanding of, you know, that in the end, it's not about only my own stupid ideas and stupid dreams and stupid ambitions, but it is also about, you know, the people that surround me and, you know, that are part of my life.
And speaking of that community of kayakers as well as the people who are seeing the film, what do you hope they take away from it? I know that everybody probably takes something different, and you took something different than you did, but what is your overall goal for the audience who sees this?
For me as an athlete, it was, I never expected that was going to be my message to further generations, and it did actually take a lot in the process for me to kind of take my ego away from that. Like, my original goal was I wanted to be that hero running Niagara Falls and coming out, celebrating, and, you know, doing something outstanding like that, and in the process being, you know, fully just ripping my ego out of that, and you know, I'm really stoked in the end that that's my message for further generations, that, you know, in the end, the message is not about that, you know, not about just, you know, doing it and being that hero, but it is also about making smart decisions.
Yeah, I mean, I've had a few people write me just in the last few days, and they've said, you know, this is a movie I really enjoyed showing to my kids, you know, and enjoyed showing to people that it's, you know, in the end, it really is not about the ego. And obviously we all, that is an aspect of action sports, and we all, we kind of chase these dragons and we chase these big dreams, because there's a variety of reasons why we want to do it. One, it's fun. Two, it can bring us a lot of notoriety and fame and money. Like that's an aspect of it, and Rafa bailing on not running Niagara, initially my reaction to that was like, what are we gonna do here? Like this is tough. But in the end, it was basically taking that